Halo Bu, bagaimana?
Halo, halo. Enggak
Terdengar.
kedengar ya?
Suara saya terdengar?
Kedengar. Suara Ibu?
Kedengaran?
Oh ya udah. Pak Kajur ngapain ke jurusan? Belum diterima. Aku tadi memang minta bagus, khusus panitia dimasukin dulu.
Kenapa miring-miring? Katanya nggak diterima. Nggak saya terima nih. Jadi aku ditolak nih.
Aku ditolak Pak Ahmad. Pian kan uzil.
Aduh, ayah sekolahnya kok pakainya bukan sapu ya.
Hah? Belum lah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Namanya siapa?
Or just, yeah, or just something. Pakai Zoom ya.
Iya. Bisa ya.
Prima Sari juga. Prima Sari dari Bapak. Prima Sari.
Ada.
Suara saya bisa terdengar. Thank you, Mas.
Sudah masuk Ibu.
Jadi
Suara saya bisa didengar, Bu? Panitia.
Yes, Pak Erik.
Oh, thank you.
Kak Eli sudah?
Ya,
Beliau sudah dikasih virtual background.
belum. Makanya aku lagi nyari.
Prof. Susan. Di Kapionila.
Kabarnya lah.
Iya.
International Fair.
Kadang bisa di-share juga di itu, apa? Chat.
Sudah saya kirim langsung ke web.
Sekedar Bapak.
Suaraku kedenger nggak? Kedenger nggak? Siapa ya?
Mbak, tolong di-share lagi dong virtual background di grup DCM ya. Bapak ke sana, Bapak sini. Bapak sini. Dia menghindari terus. Sekarang bisa kedengaran nggak? Bisa, Ibu. Hah? Fian, you are so happy.
Okay. Sekarang.
It's more, much clearer.
Yeah, you can hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Sebelah belum datang.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Dean of the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, who on these occasions directly attended by Dr. Engineering Heri Satria, MSc, Deputy of Dean for Academic Affairs and Cooperations, Deputy for the Dean of Finance, Deputy Dean of Students and Alumni Affairs, Head of Department within our faculty, Head of our study program, representative of Head Department and Study Program within our faculty, Chair of the Organizing Committee, Dr. Nuning Narot Cahyani, MSc, eminent speakers, resources persons, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen who are present here and online, good afternoon. Welcome to DCM, Diskusi Cendikia MIPA, and a scientific forum for information sharing, which is established in our faculty, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, and University of Lampung. I'm Ahmad Arifianto from the Department of Biology. As the MC, would like to open this event by inviting all of you to say Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allow me to extend our gratitude and also grateful feeling that we all blessed with a huge healthy and to always remember the services and deeds of the heroes, and also welcome this month of August, the month of independence, which we will soon see next month. Let's listen to the national anthem together, Indonesian national anthem. Okay, honorable audience, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. In this opening virtual seminar, it's our honor to have a speech from the chair of the organizing committee, who is also the head of study program of Master of Biology, Dr. Nuning Nur Cahyani. So the time is yours for Dr. Nuning Nur Cahyani.
Thank you very much, Pak Fian. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for giving us His blessing so that we could hold this activity. Because of His mercy, we are sitting in this opening event in good health. Salawat as well as greeting. Let's say thanks to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Second, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this event, Diskusi Cendikia MIPA webinar. First of all, I'm very thankful to my dean, Dr. Heri Satria, MSI, and his staff, who helped us make this seminar come true. Also, I'm very thankful especially to Professor Susan Lapan. Good afternoon, Professor Susan Lapan, our guest lecturer today, for taking time out of her busy schedule to sharing knowledge in this great academic event, even though this is actually her holiday time. I also wish to thank all the participants who coming in this seminar. I'm especially honored to welcome all of you in this webinar. Actually, the purpose of this activity is to improve the academic atmosphere for the academic community in the University of Lampung, and also to share scientific information and research results, also to strengthen cooperation both internally and with extent at the faculty and university level. Actually, this activity is the routine activity at Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, which is held every 2 months. This activity was attended by some lecturers and researchers from various universities and institutions and also agency in Indonesia. I think totaling around 207 people. Even though now who has joined still only maybe 80, yeah. This activity was our agenda. Today we focus on the topic of bioconservation technology leading for biodiversity, which will be delivered by Professor Susan Lapan. I'm sure that today we would be fun and full of learning, and I hope that this event will help us to grow professionally. And I would like to express my appreciation also in this time to the communities, to the committees who have organized this wonderful event. We could not have done it without all of you. Thank you very much. And I wouldn't like to take too much of your time now. And I'm on behalf of the committee in this event. Hope this event can go well and smoothly. I think that's for all. And once again, welcome and thank you very much for attending this event. I wish all participants good luck and thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Nuni. For the official opening, we'd like to request our Dean, who has also attending virtually in this Zoom meeting, to officially open this afternoon seminar. To Dr. Heri Satria, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tian. Hopefully my voice could be listened clearly.
Clear audible.
Okay, thank you. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. And today we have a second discussion. After this morning, we have a discussion. It is connected with the bioconservation issue. So, firstly, I would like to say welcoming again to Professor Susan Lapan to our faculty program in webinar Diskusi Cendikia MIPA. And then also for all of the participants, we will have a good topic for discussion in this session. Is connected with bioconservation technology leading for biodiversity existency. So, like Ms. Nuning said that Diskusi Cendikia MIPA is the one of the academic program that conducted every month actually, but the topic also not only for biology field, but also with the several, because of in our faculty we have 5 departments: biology, chemistry, mathematics, physics, and computer sciences. So in this time, I think I am not too long to give the speech because of I have no patience enough to listen Professor Susan Lapan give explanation about this topic today. So for all of the participants, let's enjoy our discussion, and please prepare your best question because of Professor Susan Lapan come from the USA, but her research topic, it is connected about the tropical country like us here in Indonesia, especially in Lampung province. So I think because of my task here in Diskusi Cendikia MIPA to open our program officially, So with say Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, webinar Diskusi Cendikia MIPA with the topic bioconservation technology leading for the biodiversity existency opens officially. Okay, thank you very much for your kind attention, and let's enjoy our discussion for this session. Okay. That's all, I think. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I back to Mr. Fian.
But thank you. In order opening officially this afternoon seminar by our team. In order to capture a moment and activities this afternoon, I also invite the audience to turn on your camera for our future group photo sessions, because we are going to take a documentations for this afternoon seminar. And I'm going to ask and request for the committee to virtually take all the participants' captures in this afternoon. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1 for the first slide. And then next slides, 1, 2, and 3. Slides, 3, 2, 1. Again, for anyone who has not turned on your camera, please turn on your camera. We're gonna to remember that this afternoon seminar, we already joined this seminar. Okay, thank you. There is a threat to biodiversity is a challenging situations. That was the reason for our headline today. That's why we brought bioconservation technology leading for biodiversity existence as our topic. Let me introduce to you our moderator. She's a lady that fully experienced in handling wildlife conservation within ecology. And what is the interesting about this lady, that her complete profile you can access in this screen, actually, that the committee can you provide about this spotlight. Okay, it's my honor to hand over these sessions to our moderators, actually, to Miss Ali Rustiati. This is actually the Department of Biology lectures that focusing in archaeology as a conservation psychologist. As I told you before, that wildlife conservation ecology is actually her experiences majors about Mrs. Ali. The academic backgrounds coming from the University of Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta, and it's actually also the partners about Professor Lapans a few years ago and now. So it's my honor to hand over these sessions to my beloved moderators. Mrs. Ali, time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Fian. Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm very honored today to guiding this discussion with Professor Susan Lapan. But before we let her to share her experience, I would like to introduce her, Professor Dr. Susan Lapan. Education background, she's a bachelor degree anthropology from Duke University, Durham, and then continue to master degree in biological anthropology in New York University, and the PhD is in biological anthropology, New York University, and now she is a professor in Department of Anthropology, Appalachian State University, United States of America. And so many, I think the biodata will be very long, but I'm very honored to show you that Professor Lapan got so many awards grant, including University Science Malaysia Research University grant, and then Idea Wild Equipment grant, and Disney Conservation Foundation grant, USA Fulbright Scholar Award for Malaysia. Publication, just too many to be mentioned, but most of them are related to gibbons. And thank you for Professor Lapan that she also support our biology English club on 2020, the importance of English for scientific communication. And nowadays, she's actively in IUCN Action Plan Co-Coordinator for Malaysian Small Apes, and then editorial board for Asian Primate Journal, member of IUCN Species Survival Commission, and also scientific advisory board for Malaysian Primatology Society. To Professor Lapan, I'm so sorry, the time is yours. She will present bioconservation technology leading to biodiversity persistence. The time is yours.
It's ironic that I would start a talk with the word technology in it by forgetting to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Thank you to the organizers for developing this event, and thanks to all of you for honoring me with your time and your interest in this topic. I am going to share my screen, and just once I have that going. Okay, so the title of my presentation today is bioconservation technology leading to biodiversity existence, or in most cases, persistence. And I started with a photograph of an animal because I want to acknowledge my positionality here. As Ellie has already explained to you, most of my work has been with gibbons, and most of the time when I'm doing my work, at least when I imagine myself at work, I imagine something like what you're seeing on the right. I think of myself as a field person, and my happy place is in the forest. So when I first approached this topic, I thought, what on earth am I going to say about technology? Being a field person who spends a lot of time, in the mud with the bugs and the animals. But then upon some reflection, I realized that technology is the key to everything that I do, and that one of the most sort of important lessons that I've learned throughout my career is the importance of choosing the right technology for the right task. So my presentation today is going to be organized under topics. And the first topic is going to be sort of, why do we care about biodiversity? Why is biodiversity important? And then I'll move on to talking about how technology can be used in biodiversity conservation. So to start off, yes, forests are beautiful, biodiverse ecosystems are beautiful and interesting, but from a human perspective, why is it important to us socially and economically to protect biodiversity? And obviously that could be an hour-long conversation of its own, but I want to highlight a few values that biodiversity can offer to us as humans, while also acknowledging that there is a value to biodiversity in and of itself. So first of all, protection of biodiversity can be important in managing risks and offering benefits to human communities. So for example, protection of forests on hillsides and mountaintops is crucial in the prevention of flooding, which could negatively affect communities downstream, because forests and the soils that they support can serve as sort of natural sponges that soak up the rainfall that falls on the hillside and prevents excessive immediate runoff that can cause flooding and really dangerous conditions downstream. On the sort of the converse of that, forested ecosystems upstream, sorry, I've gone ahead of myself. Forested ecosystems upstream can also be important as water catchments. And this is one of the sort of underappreciated but incredibly valuable things that intact, healthy tropical forests can do. Again, serving as a natural sponge upstream, uphill means that water is released gradually and then flows and serves the communities downstream. And most major cities rely on uphill water catchment areas to supply their the water that they depend on. And just to give you a specific example of this, one of the field sites that I've done gibbon research in is in near the area of Ulu Muda in peninsular Malaysia. And Ulu Muda is an unprotected forest. It's a forest reserve, so it exists to meet sort of the economic interests of the state of Kedah in Malaysia, in which it's located. But it also serves as a crucial water catchment that supplies most of the water for the entire state of Kedah, most of the water for the neighboring state of Penang, and a significant amount of water for the neighboring state of Perak as well, which in turn supports not only urban water users, but a large number of farmers who rely on water from that river to irrigate their crops. With the loss of this forest ecosystem, therefore, wouldn't just be a tragedy in terms of biodiversity, it would also very much harm the economy of the entire nation. Biodiversity is also important in terms of its effect on carbon cycling. We hear a lot about climate change, and especially, in anticipation of a possible Kemarau Panjang associated with the El Nino Southern Oscillation event that will be happening this year. The effect of forest as a forest and other natural systems, other biodiverse natural systems, I should say, as carbon sinks is crucially important. And of course, green areas also provide much needed relief to neighboring communities through their effects on local microclimates. And of course, let's not forget the effect of biodiverse ecosystems on adjacent agricultural systems. Farming globally depends heavily on the availability of pollinators to pollinate important food crops. And many of those pollinators in turn are dependent on adjacent areas of intact ecosystems. So when we remove biodiversity to create more agricultural space, we actually create risks to that agricultural space by threatening ecologically important creatures. So in addition to these sort of larger scale problems, there also are local economic benefits that can be derived from biodiversity. So I think this is a really marvelous tree. I like animals, but I also like plants. And this tree goes by the local name of tualang. And you can see that a ladder has been built up the tualang tree. And that is because tualang trees are also hosts to an important, economically important insect, to a species of bees that create absolutely enormous hives. It's difficult to give you a sense of scale here, but this hive is perhaps a meter or more long. The tree is perhaps 50 meters high. They can actually even get taller than that. And local people have developed this ladder system in order to harvest copious amounts of honey, which they then sell and support their livelihoods. So on both sort of a large scale and a small scale, biodiversity offers humans many benefits. Why diversity? Okay, I've hopefully convinced you that having some forest cover is important and that some specific plants and animals are important, but why is it important that we maintain the diversity? Can't we just protect the important ones? Well, no, because the diversity is part of the reason for the success of the system. Here in Indonesia, you are richly endowed with incredible forests that support a huge amount of the globe's biodiversity. And within any 1 hectare of forest, there will be many dozens of different tree species supporting an enormous number of other plant, animal, fungus, and microbe communities as well. And one of the keys to the success of the system, to the resilience of the system, is the diversity itself. And to use an analogy to agriculture, one of the reasons that diversity is important is that if we think about a farm that grows only one type of plant, If there's a monoculture farm, it is particularly vulnerable to pests and diseases because every plant is susceptible to exactly the same problems. Whereas in a more diverse system, each species has different vulnerabilities such that any one problem is unlikely to destabilize the entire system. Conditions that are problematic for one species may be optimal for another species. So there's some resilience built into the system. And of course, diverse forests also support diverse microclimates, which can then in turn support a diverse host of potential pollinators, seed dispersers, and species that provide other valuable resources. And I think it's important too, if I'm making an argument about the usefulness of diversity for humans, that we point out that we know really very little about the diversity found in these types of ecosystems. So there may be incredibly important species that we have yet to discover, whose functions we have yet to fully understand. So turning to the animals, I've made an argument that bees are important as pollinators and as sources of honey, an economically valuable product. But what about the other creatures? So the elephants, the siamons, which are the animals that I've spent most of my time studying, are they really all that important, or are they just decoration? This is a video I took of elephants because I really like elephants. I'm going to make the argument that, again, animals are crucial parts of these systems. And I showed this slide in the morning talk, but I want to highlight it again here. While we have long understood that animals depend on their ecosystems and their habitats, we're only recently really beginning to understand the extent to which animals actually build their own habitats. They are they don't just occupy an ecological niche, they actually create the ecological niches that their descendants will occupy, and also that other animals or plants may ultimately benefit from. So this complicated graphic illustrates a mathematical analysis of a seed dispersal network in one of the older forests in Southeast Asia. And what I've circled here are the species that I study, the gibbons, which are shown here in the red circles. You'll also see elephants highlighted, but you'll see many other animals here as well. This research has shown that species like elephants, hornbills, and primates are important, central, and irreplaceable because of their roles in seed dispersal networks, such that if you remove these species from the forest, the entire forest ecosystem is likely to radically change, to become less diverse, to support less wildlife, to support fewer pollinators, and to sequester less carbon. So I hope that with this example, I've convinced you of the value of diversity and of the value of animals. But just in case I haven't, I'm going to make one more argument, and that is that although we don't understand the purposes of, or the functions of every animal, it's very clear that some of these animals offer incredible benefits to humanity. On the left, this is actually a photograph from India. I did not take it myself, but it shows tourism related to tigers. There's not a lot of tiger tourism in Indonesia because our ecosystems here are different, but often tourists, see here's some foreign tourists paying large amounts of money, supporting the local community to come and benefit from the joy of viewing their wildlife. Biodiversity can offer important economic benefits to local communities, and can offer joy to everyone in the form of the services that they provide. Oops, I've gone too far forward. Let me go back. The poster on the right was actually made by an Indonesian researcher, graduate of Universitas Indonesia. Her name is Scheherazade. It's an infographic made to convince the public that they love bats. And the reason that they love bats is because bats, fruit bats specifically, turn out to be the most important pollinators of durian. And so if we don't protect our biodiversity, we are also likely to lose many people's favorite fruit. And we can't have that. So I hope now that I've convinced you that biodiversity protection is important. So let's turn to the second part of the talk title, why technology? And again, I think of myself as a field person. So in the early days of my research, most of the technology that I used was a pen, a pair of boots, and a notebook. However, over the past couple of decades, technology has come to be an absolutely vital part of the work that I'm doing and the work that many, really all of my colleagues are doing, trying to protect biodiversity. And there are a number of reasons that technology is really crucial to integrate with biodiversity conservation, and that even the sort of muddy field people like myself often come to love technology because it lets us answer questions and address problems that would otherwise really be completely intractable. And the first benefit of technology that I want to talk about is that technology can reduce problems of scale. What do I mean by that? I mean that in many cases, the questions or problems that we are trying to address need to be considered on a local problem, on a local level, an extremely local level, but also on a global level. Some of these problems are too big to be even measured using just binoculars and a notebook. So for example, if we're thinking about the impacts of agriculture, of course, we need to have people to go and visit the farms and see what people are actually doing on the ground. But with technology, we can also get a bird's eye view. We can look, use, for example, remote sensing technology to not just understand what's happening in one small geographic area, but to then place that in the context of the surrounding landscape. So here, for example, I've got an image of field workers extracting, sort of harvesting oil palm fruits. In the middle, I've got a satellite image of an oil palm landscape that shows now what the impacts of oil palm are on a larger scale. And then from that satellite image, we can then apply powerful analytical methods to look at the impacts of human activities on a regional or even potentially a global scale, like in the image in the map in the lower right, where you can see an image showing forest loss as a result of agricultural activity mapped out throughout the globe. So these sort of small local problems that are occurring on a massive spatial scale can become tractable using different and appropriate types of technology, including different ways of measuring, different ways of imaging, and then arguably the most importantly, different ways of approaching and analyzing the data. Advanced modeling can also allow us to not only look at what's happening in real time, but also it permits us to simulate what might happen in the near future. Because of course, bioconservation is really all about protecting our future. So to be able to create a habitable planet for our children and grandchildren, we need to not only think about what's happening today, but to anticipate what's coming next so that we can prevent problems as they arise and address problems before they increase. An obvious example of the use of technology to address problems of scale is also more recent advances in genetic techniques. So for example, the use of environmental DNA has not only been critical in, for example, monitoring of wastewater to look for hotspots of COVID-19 infection during the recent pandemic, but it's also now increasingly being used to extract information about the occurrence of species in different landscapes without ever even seeing the animals, by sampling the traces of their DNA that are left behind in the environment. So this gives us an incredible, powerful tool for inventory and monitoring on a scale that was previously unimagined. Genetic data are used for so many things. I can't really give an exhaustive explanation of how they're used in ecological conservation, but they're also, of course, used to understand the relationships between species, understand the consequences of past events in terms of changes in the genetic makeup of populations. They can be used to address problems of wildlife trafficking, in forensic capacity. So there's so many uses of genetic technologies, and I don't think I need to elaborate on that here because I think that's fairly well understood. But the place that technology has been most impactful to me in my own career is in reducing the time, energy, and effort involved in ecological monitoring. So the animals that I study, for example, live at the tops of trees, typically hide from people, and therefore are difficult to survey, and it requires enormous investments of time and energy to understand their behavior or ecology, or even really to get an estimate of how many of them there are in a given landscape. So the use of technology to monitor biodiversity in real time has been really an incredible benefit to those of us who are engaged in problems of ecological monitoring. So, for example, to use a really familiar example that I think we all take for granted, camera traps have revolutionized the ability of relatively small teams to monitor population trends and to conduct biodiversity inventory, while also often learning some things about behavior in large landscapes. So you put a camera on a tree, leave it behind, and it can collect data on every animal that passes until the batteries run out or the storage capacity is exhausted. This has rapidly become an absolutely standard method used around the world by diverse groups of people, including scientists, including government, wildlife authorities, and even people conducting, for example, environmental impact assessments or other sort of business related applications. And a technology like this, it seems well established, and yet people keep finding new ways to sort of add to technology to improve its utility. So, for example, the use of camera traps on the ground has long been standard, but more recently, people have been putting camera traps also at the top of the forest canopy, and there we get all kinds of new information. The images I've put on the upper right are of the discovery of a species not known to occur in the country of Rwanda, being captured in on a camera trap images from a camera trap not put on the ground, but put up in the forest canopy. Other types of imaging have also been incredibly important. So if we start with the idea of a camera, and then we add drones and other types of cameras like infrared cameras. These can be even more powerful in allowing us to, with relatively minimal effort and expense, I'm not saying that it's cheap, but relative to sending large teams out on the ground, to rapidly and efficiently extract information about the status of biodiversity in a landscape. So on the left, this is an image taken with an infrared camera from a drone, so a thermal camera, taken at night because the forest is cooler then. So mammals and birds will, because they're warm-blooded, will show up as little hot spots on a thermal camera. Here is an individual orangutan. It's circled. That little white spot is an individual orangutan spotted from an airplane. On the right, there are images from, this one was in Borneo. On the right, we have images from Vietnam. You see, these are photos taken in the daytime with an ordinary camera from a drone. The images on the right are photos with an infrared camera of the same location with a thermal camera, and you can actually pick out individuals of the critically endangered Francoise Langer. And the team that conducted this research were actually able to count the number of langurs in the landscape very effectively without having to climb the treacherous cliffs that these animals live on with the use of thermal cameras and drones. Now, this requires some knowledge of the ecology of the animals. These animals happen to sleep at the tops of trees on exposed branches, so their little hot spots from their warm bodies really stand out against the cooler forest background at night. But this is an example of the potential of technology to make life a lot easier for people who are trying to do things like monitor populations of critically endangered animals in difficult landscapes. So what about animals that are hard to see? Technology has an answer for that as well. And here I'll turn to the topic of acoustic monitoring. Acoustic means using sound. So this is monitoring of animal populations, not using a visual detection. We as people are very visual, but many animals use sound rather than vision as a primary way of communicating. And for marine mammal conservation, the use of acoustic monitoring is now a completely standard method. Teams addressing a number of different types of problems in marine mammal protection have successfully used acoustic methods to, for example, survey large areas of ocean by towing an acoustic monitor behind them and picking up on the sounds of marine mammals that they pass along the way. So you see here some small whales making loud calls that they use to communicate with each other. These are easily detectable by an acoustic monitor, and therefore you can use the sound to count how many whales there are in a landscape. Acoustic monitoring can also be used more directly in conservation applications. So for example, when offshore technology is being installed, in this case, the graphic I'm showing you is the installation of an offshore wind turbine. The construction itself can threaten marine mammal species, but with the use of acoustic monitors, construction projects can be halted when marine mammals are known to be in the area to protect their both their senses, their hearing, which might be damaged through, for example, blasts or very loud noises from the construction, and also to avoid disturbing their normal sort of social and movement behavior during the construction process. In a few places in the United States, there are permanent buoys installed with acoustic monitors on them to track the movement of whales in busy harbors, to also help to avoid collisions between ships and whales. Now, as I've already alluded, I don't actually study whales, but I'm very interested in this technology nonetheless, because a similar method is promising to allow us to get information about my favorite animals and conservation related information in a much easier way as well. So passive acoustic monitoring on land can also let us do a number of things, including measuring the occupancy of habitat fragments for animals that make loud vocalizations. My favorite animals are gibbons. Here's a photo of an agile gibbon to the left. And for those of you who haven't had the privilege of encountering an agile gibbon in the wild, I am going to play you. This is what they sound like. When they wake up in the morning, they sing loud songs to each other to announce that they are there in their territory and to announce their status as a mated pair. So I'm going to play a little bit of a song for you. Can you hear it? Yeah. The part you're hearing now is the female. And then at the very end, there was a response by the male. So when you hear this song, you can tell not only that there are gibbons in the landscape, but that there's a mated pair in the landscape. They only sing that particular set of notes when they have a partner, a breeding partner, and a territory. So when you hear that, you know that there is at least one potentially breeding pair in an area. So if you have a small habitat fragment and you're not sure if their gibbons are there or not, you can either hire a field team to walk up and down for days and days and days to figure out if they're there, or you could take a simple device. This is a passive acoustic monitor on the right. You can attach it to a tree, you can set it up, you can go have some coffee, come back a week later and analyze the recordings, and they will tell you quite definitively if there were animals within detection range of the location where you place this, and if there were any mated pairs. It's also potentially possible to answer questions about their behavior and their population density. You can count how many times you hear songs, potentially distinguish animals from the different acoustic signatures of their voices, and therefore count how many breeding pairs there are in a landscape with an array of these types of recorders. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so this is what the data look like. I played you the sound, but the recorders actually produce a visual representation of the data. And the sections that I played to you were the female great calls. So I put a box around the first female great call, and I actually see 3 in this little section of song. I'll give you a second, see if you could find the other 2, and then I'll show it to you. I'm going to show it to you in 3, 2, 1. There they are, the other 2. So if you record for hours, if you just use sort of a normal recorder, then you would have to listen for hours to find all the gibbons. But if you use this technology, you make a sonogram, we can then very rapidly scroll through large amounts of data and identify the characteristic acoustic signature of these animals and determine fairly definitively if they are in the landscape or not. The problem with this method, of course, is that you could produce enormous amounts of data because you're not just catching, one species at a time. You're getting the entire soundscape. So there are also recordings of threatened birds, of acoustic insects. The forest is a very loud place. So using these technologies, we can really capture a whole slice of life in the forest at that moment. Which also allows for the long-term monitoring of trends. You can compare the soundscape this year with the soundscape next year, the soundscape across seasons, which is amazing. Oops, sorry, more sound. But it creates a new problem, which technology can also work to reduce. And that is the problems related to storing data and analyzing data. As data get bigger and bigger, we have more and more exciting opportunities to explore the data, but we also end up with new problems of managing and analyzing these enormous amounts of data that we have collected. And of course, our colleagues here in computer science can speak to this, in a much more intelligent way than I can. But I thought I would at least mention a few solutions that have been solutions to ecological problems that have been that really have resulted from changes in our understanding of what computers can do. So in the last year or so, everyone's been very excited about the invention of ChatGPT and other sort of artificial intelligence technologies. And artificial intelligence is an incredibly powerful approach that we can use to analyzing these very large and complex data sets. So I am concerned about developing methods for monitoring gibbon populations. Well, some really incredible teams are actually right now working on using AI approaches to try to better pick out sounds of importance from these very, very large acoustic databases. Blockchain, right? We hear about that in terms of cryptocurrencies primarily, but it also offers a powerful tool for example, verifying environmental credentials in supply chains. So what I mean by that is if, for example, wood is being sold as sustainably harvested, blockchain offers a technology for keeping careful records from the source to the destination in a way that can't be altered or falsified because of this sort of diffuse storage of data in a blockchain. So it creates an easier way to actually verify claims about the origins of resources that are derived from potentially harmful technologies. So this is a really powerful tool for creating more environmentally friendly business practices, for example. I didn't want to neglect to mention the incredible advances that are being made in ecological monitoring and many other types of bioconservation technologies resulting from geographic information systems that allow us to take data from a variety of different types of sources, including, for example, remotely sensed data and data from maps and data collected in the field from vegetation, and integrating them all into making incredibly powerful geographic models that can allow us to answer crucial questions about how ecosystems are functioning, how they're being disturbed, questions about the relationship between ecological factors and the occurrence of threatened species, and many, many other uses. As I've already been alluding to, technology also can build bridges between businesses and the conservation community, because of course, people that are passionate about conservation have a role to play in biodiversity conservation, but so do the people that are powerfully impacting our world through their business practices, and through advances in technology have offered a number of new ways for businesses to become more environmentally friendly, and actually have also created new opportunities for technologies for businesses to start up to create sort of whole new industries in support of bioconservation technology. And just sort of a couple of examples here. Technology can improve environmental impact modeling, and that's something we talked about in the morning session. Being able to predict the total costs of some kind of industrial development before the development starts is crucial in permitting and crucial in sort of properly regulating business practices. And in many cases, businesses don't want to destroy the environment. So improving the technology with which they can moderate their practices in order to mitigate harms can actually result in a win-win between the business and the environment in which they're operating. I also want to mention that the incredible moment that we're having with startups in the technology field. Some of those startups are actually in businesses that are designed to address some of these very problems. I have a photo on the right here of myself and a friend that I just made fairly recently at a meeting about gibbons. She was there representing her tech startup who have combined some field people with a hardware team, a software team, and a drone team to create a business that is now developing incredible three-dimensional models of landscapes that are being used in animal survey, they're being used in environmental impact assessment, being used by national parks and forestry agencies in a number of different ways. So I think we tend to think of conservation as something that costs people jobs, but the integration of conservation and technology can actually create new jobs in exciting sectors. Arguably, my favorite use of technology in bioconservation is when it actually fixes things. And I'm going to give you an example. I mentioned this morning as well, but I have some better images for the afternoon session. Sometimes technology is the solution to a conservation problem. So one of the most pressing problems affecting animals here in Sumatra and really across tropical Asia is infrastructure development. And I spoke a bit this morning about the threat caused by these linear infrastructures. A linear infrastructure is a road, a railway, a clearing related to electric lines. So these sort of long, skinny interruptions in the forest that allow humans to communicate, travel, send electricity, send other types of signals, but also that make it difficult for forest animals to move from one landscape to an immediately adjacent landscape. And I've got some images on the left of a very low-tech solution to that problem and a much higher tech solution to that problem, but both of which employ technology to address the problem of linear infrastructures. So in the upper left, this is a simple rope. You see a gibbon hanging from a rope here. This is a white-handed gibbon. This rope was placed between two trees, spanning a cleared area associated with a small logging, or not a logging road, I'm sorry, a small road intended for tourism within a national park. A local research team found that the animals would not cross the road. So they tried hanging a rope bridge, and sure enough, the animals happily crossed the rope bridge. So just putting a piece of rope up in the canopy, in this case, solved a real environmental problem. The bigger, fancier, high-tech solution is on the lower left. You see what's called an eco-viaduct. These can be built either after the fact or during the construction of some kind of linear infrastructure to create a more permanent means by which animals can avoid crossing the dangerous road crossing and promote animal movement across landscapes. I am from the United States, and one of the biggest eco-viaduct projects in the world is currently being planned in the city of Los Angeles to promote movement of cougars or mountain lions from little isolated forest patches in different parts of Los Angeles to promote the conservation of this threatened population in that landscape. Ideally, technology can also be used to prevent these problems. So, for example, use integrating geographic information systems and mapped road networks and ecological data. We can, where possible, build roads and linear infrastructures around rather than through critical animal habitats. But so where prevention is possible, prevention should be the approach. But there are this sort of hierarchy of technologies that we can use to either prevent, or when prevention isn't possible, mitigate the damage that's being caused by these types of developments. And I was just earlier this summer at a meeting related to action planning for a critically endangered gibbon on the island of Hainan in China. And I'm about to show you a video taken from their park headquarters of the park, where the last 37 Hainan black-crested gibbons on Earth live. And they now, having lost almost the entire species, they're using some really incredible high technology and low technology solutions to monitor and hopefully support this population. So I'm going to just show you the video. The voices in the background are me and my colleagues. Here, we're just sort of amazed watching the gibbons cross the rope bridges here. But what you're looking at is, this is my sort of hand phone video of their big computer screen. They have cameras set up at various locations around the gibbon home ranges, so they can actually visually monitor the animals in real time. And this particular camera is pointing at a canopy bridge that they had placed across an area that had a landslide to facilitate animals moving safely from one side to the other so they didn't have an accident or fall. So on the one hand, this is amazing to see so much investment in the protection of this species. I was really sort of touched and inspired by it. But at the same time, I also thought, okay, you're spending all this money now that there are only 37 left. Isn't it a shame that you didn't anticipate this problem and spend much less money 20, 30, 40 years ago in preventing some of these problems? And now, with our advances in modeling technology and in detection and monitoring, and with our improved understanding of ecological interactions, it is my hope that we'll never have to see this kind of high-tech solution happen again, that we can prevent these situations where every animal has to be counted and monitored and protect populations while they're still healthy. Oops, okay, we already saw that. Okay, I just have a couple more examples and then we'll open this up for discussion. But the technology that I've also found most useful in both developing conservation plans and in communicating them to the public have been information related technologies, and particularly technologies related to communication. We are experiencing this now as we all sit in different spaces and have a conversation, or we'll soon be having a conversation about biological conservation. But this phenomenon of the webinar has really been incredible in terms of mitigating the negative impacts of, for example, the recent COVID-19 pandemic. And I have a story to share about that from my own personal perspective. In 2020, in January of 2020, I traveled to Malaysia. I had a project planned for the next 6-7 months to develop a national conservation action plan for small apes in Malaysia. And this was funded by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and planned in collaboration with the Malaysian Primatological Society and with the Habitat Foundation, which is another local NGO. And we had already invited 40 experts from around the region to come to a meeting in April of 2020 to bring all of their data so we could sit down together and develop this National Conservation Action Plan. Well, I think everyone here knows what happened in March of 2020. Obviously, that meeting could not happen. If communication technology were not where it is, that would have been the end of the project. But instead, that didn't happen. Instead, we did it like this. We transitioned to an online process. It was harder. We all sat in different, sad lockdown spaces around the world. But over the course of several months, we were able to do everything that we needed to do in an online capacity and make some new friends along the way. So I'm happy to announce that that project has now reached the point where we have a draft action plan. We're in the process of improving that, and we'll shortly be disseminating it to the public. So technology really saved this project, and I hope that it has taught us a new way of doing things. I think that is very much the case, that as a result of this terrible thing, the pandemic, we now have developed some fantastic new ways of getting work done when we can't all be in the same place. Not only can the scientists get together, but technology has also been crucial in allowing communication between scientists and the general public, because our science is worth nothing if it doesn't lead to action. And some of that action is on the part of governments and businesses, but some of that action is also on the parts of members of the general public. And I was not involved in, I'm not trying to take credit for this image on the left, but the team that was doing the Indonesia action plan for small apes during the pandemic had the brilliant idea of, in real time, creating a webinar series to, as they were developing databases and information about gibbons, to share them in real time with the public. So they were able to communicate to hundreds of members of the general public about what they were doing, and just generally to socialize the public to better understand the vulnerability of these species. So on the one hand, communication technology is a powerful source for positive change. It can also be part of the problem, though. On the right, I have a couple of images. These are, I believe both of these are white-handed gibbons, and they are being sold on Facebook in this case. You can see the likes, comment, and share options. So trafficking, illegal trafficking of wildlife for pets in Southeast Asia, specifically in Malaysia and Indonesia, is overwhelmingly, at least for the primates, now driven by sort of online marketing rather than physical pet shops. So while communication can be helpful, it can also be deeply harmful. Again, I think there's a technological solution for this. The platforms need to use tools that are already available to more carefully monitor and address violations of their own use policies in order to prevent their platforms from being used in this harmful way. I also just, I wanted to talk a little bit about my own research here. So a piece of that research that I will highlight is related to this topic of communication. I hope I have convinced you that surveying gibbons in the wild is difficult. They live in small groups. They live deep in the forests. It requires a lot of legwork in difficult terrain with the mud and the bugs. I love it, but it's hard to count the animals and to map their distribution in space. But people also notice and like wildlife. And one of my colleagues, Thad Bartlett, this was his idea, he's the third name on the paper, had the brilliant idea of looking to social media as a source of information about the distribution of animals. And we primarily used Facebook birding groups, because birders take pictures of everything, often very good pictures. And we found that gibbons are kind of like birds because they're up in the trees and they sing a lot. And so birders are attracted to them, and birders actually post a surprising number of photos of gibbons, or in some cases, acoustic recordings of gibbons on Facebook. They also, a lot of people post images and recordings of gibbons on a social media site, iNaturalist, which people use for for classifying animals and plants that they found, for communicating with others, etc. And we found, I mean, to make a long story short, that using information mostly from either Facebook or iNaturalist, we could develop distribution maps for all of the species of small apes in peninsular Malaysia that were not identical to, but just as good as the maps developed by experts doing field surveys. So communication technology is an incredible way to invite citizen scientists into the project of bioconservation and biodiversity assessment. And of course, technology is important for monitoring what happens when you attempt some kind of conservation intervention. And I'm going to give you another example from Malaysia, and I'm choosing Malaysia on purpose because we are in Indonesia, and I don't want to pick on the country that I'm in, so I'm picking on a different country. So in Malaysia, one of the problems that we found that was most vexing, really, when we were trying to develop the action plan is that it's incredibly difficult to get accurate maps of forest cover. The government doesn't want to publish them. If you ask a government official for a map of the protected area that they're tasked to protect, they won't give it to you. It's considered to be sort of secret government information, which means that it can be very difficult to tell where a protected area starts and ends. And it also means that it's difficult to assess whether the government published figures about, for example, how much forest cover there is in the country are accurate. But Now we don't have to ask the government for pictures because we can get them from space. And what I'm showing you now, these are maps. Each of these three, this is Peninsular Malaysia, this is the state of Sabah in northeastern Kalimantan or Borneo, and this is the state of Sarawak. These are maps generated with data mostly from Global Forest Watch, or from the USGS, Hansen Lab, Google, and NASA collaboration, in which you can track forest cover change from space in almost real time, that show the actual distribution of intact forest and degraded forest across each of these landscapes. So we usually use the words ground truthing to mean checking things on the ground to make sure that they are the way that they look from space. But in this case, we're doing the opposite. We're actually using images from space to check reports about what are happening on the ground. And this is really important especially the country I've been talking about in Malaysian context, because Malaysia is the country that's losing its forests fastest in Southeast Asia. In fact, fastest in Asia. It's one of the most rapidly deforesting one of the areas being most rapidly deforested. So the ability to monitor forest change independently of the government is important for kind of keeping everybody on the same page and making sure that there are checks and balances on the reporting of the outcomes of conservation interventions. Okay, so I've given you some examples of how I use technology and how people, in related fields use technology. But I also kind of wanted to wrap up by saying, what does this actually mean? For people who are in bioconservation, you already know what this means for you. So here I'm really speaking to people who don't kind of think of themselves as being in this area. But the first thing I want to say is if you asked somebody in the 18th century what they would have called it a naturalist looks like, they would have perhaps shown you an image like this. This is Alfred Russel Wallace, who explored this region in the 1800s. Of course, what is not shown in this photo is all of the local naturalists that provided him with all of the information that he had. That is a bias of Western science. But even Western scientists, we don't dress like this anymore. I don't look like that, right? But, this is not how it is anymore. As technology changes, as culture changes, we need to change our approaches. So ultimately, I suppose I'm going to sum up by saying that we can't solve the problems of the 21st century with the tools of the 18th century. So even muddy field people like me really need to get with the program and employ different technologies. But this isn't just about people like me. This is about everybody, because the use of technology has now changed the conservation landscape such that people in many different areas have a role to play in bioconservation or biodiversity conservation. So it isn't just, the field people with our binoculars that are needed to conserve biodiversity. It's also people in computer science. It's also people who are excellent communicators and really know how to use social media. There are an enormous number of different ways to engage with biodiversity conservation, and not all of them involve the risk of leeches, mosquitoes, and mud. Another conclusion that I want to draw here is that choosing the right approach and the right tools for projects is essential. So we need to not just do things the way that they've always been done. Standard methods always should be questioned, because often there are newer and more efficient ways of doing these things. And where we find a problem and we don't have the tools to solve it, well, that's where the entrepreneurs and the creative types need to get involved, because where those tools don't exist, that's your job. You guys need to make those. So, all right, I'm going to stop my sort of talking at you part here, and we can then start the discussion. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Professor Lapan, for very, very interesting presentation. I think, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Okay, from the beautiful presentation. I think I can see that the technology actually is a crucial support system nowadays to facing the development and human welfare improvement, as well as for the biodiversity conservation effort. And also that biodiversity, interestingly, have special characters and also special diverse species in every landscape. So we cannot put the same tool for different space. So it's very nice to know. So we are talking about the biodiversity when we talk about technology versus the conservation, and also when you show the ecotourism working, people watching the tiger, and also how to introduce the conservation to those people. And so it is very nice. And I will have question, but I think, do we have question? And yeah. Okay. On the ada? Oh, Resen. Okay. Prof. Budi, please welcome, and you can ask Prof. Lapan directly.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ellie, and also congratulations. I'm sorry, my voice is, I have a flu yesterday, so my voice is not so nicely. Thank you so much, Professor Susan. I'm Budi Setiadi Daryono. I'm a chairman of Indonesian Biology Consortium, and it's really honor for me to hear your very nice presentation about the bioconservation technology leading for biodiversity existence. So in Indonesia, we have, as you know, Indonesia is one of the biggest biodiversity country. And now we have also, I agree with Dr. Ellie says, we are focused on how to protect our biodiversity using an example of biotourism. But as you compare, Indonesia biotourism is not so developed as well as in biotourism, in example in South Africa. And what's your suggestion? Because yeah, maybe we have to improve our quality on biotourism. And the other hand, we also have to improve our bioprospecting. One of the tools how to protect our mega biodiversity. And for those, because bioprospecting, mainly the raw material is in developing country, from developing country mostly. But as you know, that, for example, in developing country is also too expensive to get some tool for our improvement in biotechnology. Yeah, we need effort for this one. So I want to also have your suggestion on these bioprospecting problems. So we have the raw data as many as well, but we lack of the advanced technology, not for human resources, but mostly for the capacity to improve the instrument, the laboratory instrument. And the last thing, what's your opinion about the metaverse? Because biology also, I agree with your opinion, biology also have to tend to use the tool of metaverse for our conservation. For example, using virtual reality or maybe augmented reality, as well as you already mentioned, we also, biologists also have to learn a little bit about the big data and also artificial intelligence. I do agree with your opinion. But how to start? Yeah, Indonesia have to start, but I do believe with the collaboration. Yeah, collaboration I think is important. Dr. Ellie is a very nice example for the collaboration with others country. I think that's enough. And sorry, my voice is not that good for. I'm sorry, I got the code yesterday. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this session. Thank you.
Maybe before Professor Susan Lapan answer the Professor Budi Setiadi Daryono question. So I'm really appreciate for your attendance and so exciting when I know Prof. Budi Setiadi Daryono joined with our meeting today. So welcome to our discussion, Prof. Budi Setiadi. Thank you very much for your time. Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Heri Satria, and also Prof. Budi Setiadi Daryono. He's the Dean of Faculty of Biology and University of Gadjah Mada. Susan, please, if you want to comment on that.
Okay. Yes, thank you. You honor me with your presence and you great questions. So there were several questions. I'll start with the question about tourism and
Biotourism.
ecotourism.
Compared with the South Africa.
Yeah. So it's true. There are there's less money coming into Indonesia for ecotourism than is going into South Africa. And there are a number of reasons for that. South Africa has, I'm not an expert on tourism in South Africa, mind you, but my understanding of the economics there is they have a very well-developed ecotourism with sort of fancy lodges and safaris. They also have fantastic kind of marketing of the big five that you're supposed to see in their parks. And they supplement that in many cases with kind of hunting, where people will pay large amounts of money to shoot and kill an animal of a threatened species, often one that was bred specifically for that purpose in their sort of hunting farm. So they've got this diversified income stream coming from different. You got your photographers, your safari people, your a lot of different sort of ways of extracting money from wildlife. They also, South Africa is an interesting mix of rich and poor in that they have some cities that are very well developed and then a large population of impoverished people. And they also have, like Indonesia, sort of a history of complex interaction with Europe that creates sort of a social connection between, actually in both cases, the Dutch and South Africa and Indonesia, but with sort of different histories and reasons. But having said that, they're very different. And I don't think that using South Africa as a model for Indonesian tourism is going to work. It's a very different landscape. It's a different culture. It's a different people. It's a different economy. So, both, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Indonesia needs to take an Indonesian path, not a South African path. An Indonesian path might look very different. One aspect of ecotourism that is not terribly well developed in Indonesia is local ecotourism. One of my projects was in Gunung Halimun Salak National Park, and that was one of the places where we did actually, while I was at the field site, sometimes occasionally tourists would actually come from Jakarta or Bogor, which were nearby, had relatively easy access and wanted, people would come for the weekend. But that was not a very well developed means of ecotourism. It was actually, quite accessible, unlike some other parks, like the park where I've spent most of my time on in Sumatra. Bukit Barisan Selatan is much more difficult to access. But there has been relatively little development of this kind of local ecotourism relative to the potential for it. And that, I think, is a missed opportunity that could be developed through, for example, more outreach to younger communities. Everyone, children, I think, around the world know about lions and zebras and elephants, but they don't necessarily know about lutung or, elang Jawa, or hornbills, or, what have you, the animals that live in their own backyards, a lot of city children here couldn't even name. So to love something, you have to know it exists first. So I think this kind of outreach to people at a younger age, to get children excited about going to see these animals that in many cases live only a relatively short distance from their home, but that they're never going to see unless they go to the forest or to the coast or whatever, whatever landscape we're talking about. I think there's a real opportunity there that could be developed in Indonesia. International tourism, it's also an option. And again, I think it's really about communication and some amount of support for local communities to help them to develop infrastructure that will attract and keep ecotourists interested. So if someone, if one foreign tourist comes and has a great experience and posts about it on social media, suddenly that place is on the map and other people will want to come. But to ensure that great experience means supporting local communities as well as they try to develop their ecotourism infrastructure. So those are some things that I think could be done in Indonesia. Indonesia is a wonderful country to visit. I've been to South Africa. I've been to Indonesia. I've been to South Africa once. I've been to Indonesia. I can't even count how many times because it's such a great place. I keep coming back. So you need to get people through the door. Once they come once, they'll keep coming back. So I do think there's a lot of potential. Having said that, ecotourism is not the solution to all conservation problems. For the less accessible places, maybe ecotourism isn't the answer. Every situation requires an answer sort of tailored to that context. I'm going to move on to your next question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your explanation.
Okay, so
you move to bioprospecting.
Bioprospecting, yeah. Actually, I think that you sort of had two questions in here, and yeah, I agree completely with the what you've described, and I think you described it very well. That we're living in a situation where these incredible natural resources are here, and we don't even really know what else here. There are so many potentially economically, socially, medically, useful chemicals and organisms and systems in Indonesian biodiversity that we haven't even imagined them yet. We don't even really know where to begin looking for them, right? So there's this incredible richness out there, and yet the systems that would allow Indonesia to better benefit from these resources are not well developed, and this has kind of led to some really problematic relationships, internationally especially. And I wish I had a really great answer for you, but I think the best answer that I can give you, you actually kind of gave it yourself, and that is collaboration. I think that there is too little teamwork, and by teamwork, I don't mean you have this job and I have that job and each of us looks out for our own interests, but I mean real collaboration where from the beginning of a project, before the project is even developed, from the beginning of a relationship, it starts with a relationship, people talk to each other, people, the bioinformatics people and the field people and the biochemistry people, whatever it is that we're talking about, we need to have different experts with different skills in the same conversations from day one. And they need to plan research together as equals, and they need to execute that research, maintaining excellent communication along the way. So who's going to actually do the bioprospecting? It's the people in the field, right? It has to be local people who know the landscape, who know what they're looking for. Local expertise is essential and irreplaceable, it has to be there. But local experts can't do all this alone. If they could, Indonesia has plenty of local expertise. This would already be being done, right? You've outlined a number of additional challenges that cannot be met just by relying on kind of the field people. You've got to have these partnerships. And some of this is about streamlining, bureaucratic processes, but a lot of it goes, I think, a bit deeper to kind of resetting some of these relationships between rich and poorer countries. For example, if the goods and services are that result from bioprospecting are only benefiting other countries and the benefits stay there, then how on earth is Indonesia supposed to develop the laboratory facilities and information infrastructure that is needed to really properly even categorize what resources you have in this country? So there work needs to be done on a lot of different levels. And yeah, if I had a perfect recipe for you, I would share. I would, but this is a complex problem, and I think that it's going to require a lot of work. But I think it starts with collaboration, real collaboration, equal partnerships, excellent communication, and kind of maybe rethinking how the rewards of science and research work. It shouldn't be that the local on the ground people do all the work and then someone else gets all the credit and the rewards. There needs to be some, more equality. So I think equality is an important piece of this as well. So we need culture change, we need practice change, we need new administration, a lot of things. It's a great question. I keep talking, but I don't have a better answer than that. Yeah, but thank you for that. Very thoughtful.
I really appreciate your suggestion. Okay, and the last one, how about the metaverse, the tools on the metaverse? Can we use for our?
Okay. And okay, can you remind me? You elaborated on the question so well the first time, and
in metaverse there is 3 tools that's using for virtual reality.
Oh yeah. Oh right. Okay. Okay.
And how we can use it to protect our biodiversity.
Okay, thank you. Well, my first thought, and thank you for reminding me, because I knew I was excited to say something about tools like virtual reality, is that, as I said a moment ago, to love something, you first have to know about it. And virtual reality and other tools like that can be really powerful in helping people to be interested in bioconservation. I think a lot of urban people are scared to go to the forest. They think it's loud. They think it's messy. There are leeches there. I mean, they're not wrong. It is. It's all these. It's difficult. It's dangerous. I love it, but it's not for everyone, right? So how can we get people to love places that, or to at least value? Maybe they don't have to love them, but to appreciate places that they're never going to go. The metaverse offers an incredible, or less, things like it. I don't want to. It's not just meta itself, but that type of technology can be really powerful in changing people's minds by giving them access to experiences that they might not otherwise have. And this includes, for example, people with disabilities that might make it difficult for them to travel. Maybe they want to go to the forest, but they can't. If they can have a virtual reality experience that places them there, that might make it easier for them to understand and to connect with and to care about and to work to protect these wild places that that are so special to some of us. So I think we have yet to really see how powerful these can be, but so I mean, I think about the sensory experience of being in the forest. It's a really powerful motivator. It's not just the pictures, right? We're used to kind of still images, but having the sounds and the sounds in multiple dimensions, and it's not just a still, but the movement. It's a very different experience that I think tools like the metaverse might actually allow us to to share. So, maybe there can even be an element of virtual tourism, right? Ecotourism. Maybe some places aren't accessible to tourists by foot, either because it's too sensitive to let people in. Maybe there's a really critical endangered species there, or because it's just difficult to access. But these tools can help connect people with those places. So I think it has a ton of potential. And again, fabulous question. I'm going to be thinking about that for weeks. So I really appreciate your.
Thank you. Thank you. I also thank you for all of your suggestion and also knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Budi Setiadi Daryono. Speedy recovery, hopefully. I mean, all right. So it seems that the for the wrap-up for the Prof. Budi is like will need to be integrated and multidisciplinary, partnership. And also, yes, virtual ecotourism and education has been done during the pandemic. We've done that with the local people, and it's really great, Prof. Budi. Please come by to Lampung, and who knows, next year, Prof. Susan will be coming back. Okay, there is another one from Dr. Favorizan Erlumban Raja. Dr. Favorizan, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is, you can call me Rossi. I'm from the Department of Computer Science, and particularly in bioinformatics laboratory. So I'm quite interested in the primates in, like say, in Lampung. Is there any opportunities for us to get the genetic data of primates that you are researching, especially like DNA sequence or protein sequence? Or the second question is there any genetic or something quite particular that is interesting in a protein sequence analysis? So maybe like a disease, genetic disease, or genetic physiology that is quite particular in Lampung. Maybe like that. That is my question. Thank you.
The uniqueness that you found in Lampung about ants.
Yeah.
The data, the genetic data on primates.
Yeah. Okay. So that was a two-part question again. So I'm going to take the first part. To get genetic data from the primates, there are several different ways to do that. This, depending on the species, usually the main way that it's difficult and legally problematic to capture animals, so mostly we don't. I'm running this through my head now. How many of the species in Lampung are endangered? I think they're all threatened, with the possible exception of the lorises here. So capture and release is for the most part not going to be a good method. But in many cases you can get DNA from fecal samples for any species. You can get DNA from for the macaques, often from, because they spend more time on the ground, dropped fruits, the things they've been handling, things immediately in their environment. There are other methods for getting DNA.
Is there any like database that we can access? Or
there are a few sequences on GeneBank. There's not very much. People, it's difficult to do genetic research on primates or it has historically been primates in Indonesia, both because of sampling issues, but also permitting issues, technological limitations. It takes a lot of legwork to get permits to get that kind of sample, and relatively few people have done it. 20 years ago, I did a tiny bit of work with CM on DNA, and what there is on GeneBank, but there's not very much. The second part of you, so really, my suggestion would be that if you want to do research on primates, it probably would be easier for you to start by sampling. And here, in Unila, you have many hardworking undergraduates with strong legs and energy who might be able to go out and chase some animals and collect some samples and bring them back, the fecal samples, if you can get the permitting issues sorted out. It's not quite as difficult as it sounds to get fecal samples. It is difficult, but it's not, it is doable in most cases. The second question, that was a really interesting one to me, the question about sort of what one might actually study about them. Are there any particular problems or issues of interest? Because you mentioned diseases, I'll say that we know quite little about the importance of disease and sort of the prevalence of different types of diseases in primates more broadly, and Indonesian primates, specifically. And this is a problem on a practical level because, well, for two reasons. Actually, for many reasons, but I'll outline two of them. One of them is that primates often are traded in the pet trade, and then they're either rescued from the pet trade or they're confiscated or surrendered by their owners as they become older and more difficult to manage, which means that there are a large number of primates originally from the wild, but now in captivity in rehabilitation centers. And they are faced with the challenge of trying to keep these animals healthy when they don't even necessarily know what a healthy wild animal looks like. What I mean by that is they don't know, if they encounter a potential pathogen, they don't know if it's actually pathogenic or sort of a normal part of the microbiome of a wild animal of that species. So getting more information about microbiomes in wild primates would have an immediate practical use in the rehabilitation of animals that are rescued or confiscated from the pet trade, and that have the potential to be reintroduced, because you don't want to reintroduce an animal that has a pathogen that isn't present in the wild population. Other reasons that understanding diseases is important is that once in a while, disease outbreaks occur in wild animals, and we've actually experienced that in Lampung. Bu Eli and I worked on a description of such an outbreak in Bukit Barisan Selatan that we saw a rapid and unprecedented population decline in the siamangs in the Waichanguk research area. At first, we didn't know why, but then our local team started finding dead individuals, and then ultimately observing visibly sick individuals. It took a very long time to actually, I think it took, trying to remember how many years from when we realized they were dying till an animal was able to be necropsied. It was several years at any rate, but the Bukit Barisan Selatan National Park staff ultimately were able to do a necropsy on one of the animals that had died and identify some issues, but that animal was already elderly, so maybe not typical of like, they may not have offered all of the information that we needed to really understand what was happening. So a better understanding of disease health and disease in wild populations might also be potentially crucial in going forward and intervening in cases where we start to see some kind of outbreak like that. A third point of interest I'll mention is the genetics of these wild populations, both in terms of their phylogeography, sort of their population histories, but also consequences of inbreeding in small fragments. These are also topics of I think, great concern to those of us who care about the animals. So these are also topics that I think would be really interesting to look at from a bioinformatics perspective. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. He's a bioinformatics expert. So
I feel quite intimidated to be answering a question like that because I'm not a bioinformatics expert.
All right. And on the chat room, I think we have some questions. The first one is from Bambang Irawan, it's many of our people are still hungry, uneducated, and poor. How to teach them the main priority of the importance of biodiversity if they use the main source of their life as being by exploring biodiversity?
Thank you for that question. So sorry, we're having a tech fail here, but we did manage to get one of the computers back on. So I am now impersonating Kimmy. But so I'll go ahead and address the question that was asked a few minutes ago before the tech difficulties. The question was about people who are relying on biodiversity for their income, but that are economically marginalized and lack other opportunities because of minimal education. And I guess I want to start by reframing that question a little bit, because it's a really good and important question. And I would like to suggest that rather than viewing this as a situation of conflict between people and biodiversity, I'd like to reframe that as an opportunity to engage people with biodiversity. There is no one who is better equipped to fully understand how important biodiversity is than the people who rely on it for their everyday living. So I think viewing sort of those people as the problem is an approach that's less likely to be fruitful than viewing them as potential or real, already allies. People, for the most part, don't want to destroy their environments. What they need are the tools to use their environments, live in their environments in a more sustainable and biodiversity supportive way. And some of those solutions are going to involve support from outside of their communities, but they're also often going to involve empowerment of local people. And so, for example, studies of community management of threatened landscapes as compared with management by, for example, nation states show that actually, in many cases, community managed lands are better protected than national parks. Most of the data for this they come from outside of Indonesia. This is well established in the context of the Brazilian Amazonia, for example, that indigenous communities in particular are very good at protecting the landscapes in which they live when they are empowered to do so. And some of the things that give them that power are things like secure land tenure. So if they know, it makes sense to manage land for your grandchildren if you know that your grandchildren will actually have access to that land. But it doesn't make sense to manage land with your grandchildren in mind if you have no reason to believe that you and your descendants will continue to have access to that land. So improving the well-being of people who are marginalized and living on the habitat edges is really a crucial part of biodiversity conservation. So I don't mean to sort of pile all the development problems of the world on conservationists, but I think that acknowledging that local and indigenous people, have the right to support their livelihoods isn't necessarily in contradiction with the argument that it's also necessary to protect biodiversity. In fact, it's necessary to protect biodiversity for those people, just as it is for everyone else. So my suggestion, I guess, is that we think of local communities again as potential allies and offer them the support that they need in terms of education, certainly, but also other forms of empowerment. Don't just give them the knowledge about the problems, but also the tools that they need to solve them. It is an enormous problem and the solutions will be different. So there's also, understanding that there's no one size fits all solution, and working with local communities and understanding their actual needs is laborious. It's time consuming. It requires, long-term investments, but it's the solution most likely to lead to a good outcome. So that would be my answer to that question.
I'm going to remind you that there is questions in our chat rooms talking about how to give any solutions to push any law enforcement if the law enforcement actually is not work in a good way.
Yeah. Okay. So law enforcement. Yeah. Indonesia has great laws with regard to biodiversity conservation in most senses. I mean, there are strong prohibitions on a lot of problematic uses of wildlife, and yet these problematic behaviors do persist. So yeah, law enforcement needs to be part of the solution, but as in the current day, there are a lot of problems there. And again, these are just my thoughts. That's not my area of expertise. So I want to acknowledge that I'm a humble biologist, but there are actions that need to be taken in many different realms. Some of those involve education of the public about those laws. Others involve culture change around those laws. So for example, to give a sort of trivial example, on my way here, I drove through Bukit Barisan Selatan National Park. Well, I didn't drive, I sat in the back of the car, but you know what I mean. And I saw a large number of pigtail macaques on the side of the road where they were waiting for people that drove by to give them food. And we drove for a couple of kilometers, and I was thinking, why isn't there a sign telling people not to do that feeding macaques is a really problematic behavior and it is illegal? And then I saw a sign that said, after a couple of kilometers of this, on the way into the park, people coming the other direction would see a large sign saying it is illegal to feed these animals. So the information is there. And yet, this is a problematic behavior that has developed in the last, I would say 10 years. 10 years ago, I never saw that. And now it's constant, it's every day. So even though the law is in place, and even though people are aware of the law, people are choosing to feed the animals anyway. So the question then becomes, why are they doing that? And I think that it's still largely ignorance, that they know they're very unlikely to get caught and arrested. Enforcing the law by trying to catch people in problematic behavior, it's very unlikely unless they put up, cameras and capture license plate numbers, and that would require, a lot of complex integration across systems and would probably yield fairly poor results in terms of changing people's behavior. So instead, in a case like that, what we need is prevention. We need to better educate people about why they shouldn't do that behavior. So while we've got that sort of the stick of law enforcement, we really also need to think about the fact that mostly people don't want to do the wrong thing. They just don't understand what the right thing is. Now, that is not necessarily true when we're talking about things like illegal harvesting on a larger scale of forest resources. And again, I've been working in Bukit Barisan Selatan for a long time and have noticed a really remarkable change in law enforcement efficiency over the last 20 years or so. It used to be that there were trucks carrying logs going out constantly, and none of that was legal, or very little of it was legal. But there was very little risk of getting caught. Since then, to smart management, not necessarily getting the park more resources, although I'm sure they would appreciate that as well, but changes that have allowed them to use their resources more effectively by, for example, focusing on the roads where the logs were actually being transported, led to change in behavior of members of the community when they realized that they could no longer easily get away with what they were doing. It wasn't so much high-profile arrests per se, as I understand it, but rather awareness that enforcement was more targeted and more efficient. That changed the behavior of people on the other end. Other steps that need to be taken involve not just sort of arresting officers, but the legal system after that. So judges, prosecutors need to understand the importance of wildlife crime. They need to understand that these crimes are not just, technically you broke a law, but no, that real harm is being done to the nation when wildlife crimes occur, biodiversity related crimes occur. So I think this is going to take a multi-level tailored approach, and the solution, I keep saying this, but the solutions are going to be different in different places that are experiencing different types of law enforcement challenges. I hope I've at least given you some ideas in response to your question.
Okay. All right. There is another question from Urfi Faizah Unesa. Based on your experience, what citizen science activities are effective in helping bioconservation activities for our biodiversity, and can you give suggestion for the academic community, especially students, be actively involved in citizen science activities?
Okay, that's a great question too. So there are a lot of different ways that people can engage in citizen science. I mean, there's actually enormous literature on this topic, and I have barely scratched the surface of it, so I'm not going to be able to give you a comprehensive answer. But citizen scientists can do all kinds of things really in support of science projects. Most of my familiarity with citizen science comes, of course, from the primate world. And there, some of the different approaches that I have seen, or, in the one case employed, I've described my own engagement with citizen science, but so I've seen it I'll give you a couple examples from different countries, but then also sort of think through some things that maybe would be more relevant here in Indonesia. So in Singapore, there is a critically endangered monkey called the Raffles-banded langur, and it lives in a little habitat fragment right kind of in the middle of this big urbanized island. And one of the programs that the team that's working to protect the Raffles-banded langurs has found great success with is asking volunteers to go out into the area around where the Raffles-banded langurs live, and to actually basically serve as their field scouts, if you will. They've got citizens who are going and trying to find the monkeys and taking a picture of, this is where they are, and tracking them in real time. And even though those citizen scientists aren't, trained scientists, they're not analyzing the data, there's not perfect standardization to what they're doing. When you're trying to when very little information is available about an animal, an eyewitness report can actually be very useful if the program infrastructure exists to put a lot of these observations together into what becomes then a range map of this critically endangered species. So where they're spending their time, what trees they're using, where they're most at risk of crossing a road. So in urban landscapes, I can think of some related examples in other countries, but in urban landscapes, often compiling information about just where animals have been sighted can be incredibly useful. So you'll have citizen scientists who literally what they're doing to make a contribution is just going about their day. And then if they happen to see a monkey by the side of the road, sending a location, to the scientist. That's one kind of citizen science project. But sort of more generally, in moving beyond primates, citizen scientists can do all kinds of important work. Water quality sampling, for example. I know of a number of projects that have involved even elementary school children in going out and collecting water from different waterways, and then taking it to the lab scientists who then assess, the different, the microbes and chemicals, in the water, to develop a larger kind of real-time sample of what's happening than they could do with their own resources. So this is sort of a fun thing for the kids to do. They'll go out every morning and take a water sample from whatever, like the little river that runs near them. But they're also connected with this larger project of monitoring water quality across an entire watershed. Other citizen science projects that really, I think anyone can be involved in are things like monitoring bird migrations. In the United States, where I live, every year there's a week that the Audubon Society has the Great Bird Count, and they ask people to go out into their backyards, the backyard bird count, and identify the birds that they see in their house, just in their own halaman, their own space. But when you put all of this citizen science together, it becomes powerful. One person's observation are not worth really anything, but when well, they're worth something to you, but you know what I mean. But when you have hundreds of people doing the same thing, it can be of real value. So the end of your question was sort of what, as an undergrad, can you do? And I am not well enough networked around UNILA, around Lampung, to say like, oh, join this project. Like, I don't know of existing projects here, but you can create one of your own if you can't find one in the community. This is a great way for undergraduate students and graduate students who are interested in doing science to also do science outreach and if you can create a project maybe in your lab and have some school kids go out and do something for you. And it's a great way of getting other people involved in research, helping them to understand and care about nature, while also getting yourself a lot of free lab assistance from volunteers. So I've always been surprised when my colleagues and I have initiated citizen science projects at how excited people are to get involved. I mentioned the Ulu Muda watershed in my presentation. We did surveys of over the course of several months of gibbon populations in that landscape, led by my master's student, Ethan Pang. And for most of the time, his entire field team was volunteers. We had people who just, these are sort of like those people who would otherwise be ecotourists. They ranged from foreigners to business people to local undergraduates. We didn't have any children because it was a difficult landscape to work in, but all kinds of people were willing to take time out and go into the forest and get really muddy when actually given the chance. So if you can't find a project, you can make your own. Or ask your professors if they know of something. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I hope that will be answered the question. Last but not least, there is a question from Dr. Ronius Marjunus. Would you like to tell me how can human count the population of a species such as primates in an area, for example, national park? Do they count it by sampling, or is there any already technology for counting it?
Okay, that's a great question. Try again. Yes. Okay. Did it work that time? Okay. So I'm having another tech fail. Sorry. So it really depends on the situation. So earlier I showed you the video of the gibbons crossing the bridge. In that case, there are 37 gibbons left. We know exactly how many because they've been very intensively studied because the population is known to be so small. So every individual is known. That is rare. We don't normally know every individual. That requires an enormous investment of time and labor and money, and normally that is not available. So it's usually sampling, and the sampling method will depend on the ecology of the species itself. So for example, for some species, camera trapping can work fairly well. We can get a sense from both the capture rate, but also from the photographs on the camera traps may show different subsets of a group, and by matching the features to the photos, you can actually get a pretty good sense of how many individual animals are passing a camera on a given day. Speaking of citizen science projects, there are a number of online citizen science projects where you can just go in and help researchers do things like identify photographs from camera traps. And there was one a few years back that had people, it was called Chimpanzee, which was a plesetan, a pun about chimpanzees. And they had people actually trying to identify individual chimpanzees from photos, and they needed volunteers to just sit and look at photos of chimpanzees and try to figure out which one it was, because they were sort of ground truthing a project that they'd done. But so for some species, camera trapping is the sampling method of choice if they're on the ground. For gibbons, we use a number of different methods, but at this point, one of the more standard methods is acoustic survey, as I said. So we listen for them. We'll put observers at listening posts, and then you record where you hear them singing from, the direction and estimated distance. And obviously the observers have to be well trained before you do this. And then there are a bunch of different techniques. You can either triangulate the location, or there are modeling techniques like spatially explicit capture and recapture methods that use sort of a computer simulation to develop a model to estimate how many are in the population. But for the vast majority of species, population estimates are based on samples, and often the samples are quite small. So usually our data are poor. Usually we don't, for example, for gibbons, the team that just recently assessed them for Indonesia, this assessment hasn't been published yet, but they have been telling me that they have, I think, 700 location points, and like 600 of them are from Java. So that gives you a sense of how little information there is from all of the other large landscapes where these animals occur. So, so definitely, that's an area that needs improvement. Some of these new technologies, like the drone surveys with infrared cameras, are useful, but they're very expensive also and technically difficult. So those are useful for critically endangered animals with small distributions living in very difficult landscapes. So for some of those, the technology solutions may really, really improve the quality of the data, or just make the researchers' lives a lot easier. But a lot of it is just on the ground, difficult sampling work still. So new technologies would be extremely welcome to make that job easier. All right.
Thank you, Professor Lapan.
Thank you, Pak Ronius. Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Lapan. It's very refreshing presentation and discussion, because we learn that technology actually is one of the support system that is really important, and have two faces of coin. Either will be negative or positive effect. It's really depend, again, back to the human being, how to use it. Thank you very much. And I think this is for the end of the discussion, because we already passed 15 hours. Is there any other question? Okay. Okay, can you read it for me?
Okay, the question is actually about, based on your experience, what citizen science activities are effective in helping bioconservation activity for our biodiversity? And can you give suggestions for the academic community, especially students, be actively involved in citizens science activities? I mean, community involving in activity for biodiversity developing.
Yeah, I think that's the previous question.
Okay, yeah,
About the academic activities of the students.
okay, yeah, I'm still struggling to see how this is different from the previous question. For academics, I mean, I will say this, and maybe this will answer the question. I hope so. For the academic community, citizen science can be used in a number of different ways. So for example, in some cases, the data are already out there in the wild, if you will, on the internet somewhere, because people are cataloging their lives in a way that they never were before through, TikTok, Instagram, in many different ways. So this kind of extraction of data from citizens who are just going about their lives but recording things as they go is a really, it creates a nice database for people who are looking to understand a problem but don't actually have the time, energy, resources, motivation, what have you, to go out and collect data. So, you know, for example, the paper I showed you where we looked at Facebook and iNaturalist, that was actually largely, I mean, the lead author was a PhD student, but we had an undergraduate partnered with her that did a lot of the work. Undergrads are great at this kind of thing because you guys are digital natives and you're, you know, really better, I think, in a lot of cases at social media than, you know, the older folks, like, you know, no one else here, but definitely me. So, you know, if you're kind of just looking for a problem but don't want to do field work, you know, that's an opportunity for academics. But also, you know, some of these tools, I guess, are very useful for in a classroom. So, for example, if you are teaching undergrads or teaching, you know, someone else, if you become a high school teacher or what have you, and you're trying to get students to look around them and see the biodiversity around them, asking them to go out and spend, you know, I do this with my undergrads. I have them go out and find 3 organisms. They can be anything, and identify them using, I have them use the Seek app, which is, it's SEEK. It's also developed by iNaturalist. And you could just take a picture of something and it'll estimate kind of what it is. And, you know, I always expect that I'll get, you know, 3 squirrels and I don't know, like a really common bird, but that's not what happens. Students take pictures of all kinds, like they find the weirdest animal or plant or, you know, fungus that they can find and try to identify that. So for, you know, in an academic instructional setting, using these tools that were really developed to get citizen scientists communicating with each other to engage new people in, or to engage your own students in looking for and understanding biodiversity, is something that can be really, really effective. And furthermore, when people get really into it on iNaturalist, you can also help other people with their identification. So if you happen to be interested in, you know, fungi, and you can't find a friend to talk about fungi with because you've already, you know, exhausted what your friends are interested in hearing about fungi, you can go on iNaturalist and look for pictures of fungi and help other people who are interested in fungi identify their fungi. I've met a surprising number of people that, you know, really find it very rewarding to do that in their free time. It also helps them to develop their own expertise. So, so those are some thoughts about kind of more academic and instructional uses of citizen science. Something I haven't tried, but I'm looking forward to trying one day, is to try to do a research project as a class and turn every student, you know, into a field scientist. Everybody gets, you know, a little part of the problem to address, and we all go out and collect data together and analyze it together. So I think the citizen science model has a lot of applications in an academic setting.
Thank you, Prof. Lavan. It's very, very interesting. Yes, I use also some citizen research with the local farmer and the local people, and it's very interesting how we can get the different perception for what we get and what they want to have. So it's a very, very nice to know. Okay, thank you very much. I think this is Papian. This is the last one. Okay, this is the last question. Thank you very much, Prof. Lapan, for the best discussion for today, 2 sessions, and hopefully it's not too tiring. But before we close, I think we want to share our appreciation for certificate virtually and the souvenir that we have. Thank you very much. And a little souvenir. It is made specially for you. It's a painting. Hopefully it will bring some memories. Thank you very much. And I will give back to Pak Pian. Thank you, Susan. Yeah.
Okay, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure to come back with closing statements. Actually, on behalf of the committee, that occur during at the end of our seminar, we do not hope that's because of this is an independent situations that actually occurs within us. We do really apologize. And see you on the next seminars. Actually, there was participants that questions asked about when is the schedules our next seminars. We are going to update the informations within your groups, and also going to inform again about our next seminars coming soon, inshallah. And see you in the next seminars. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.